You say you're distracted, but that's not the truth. You're disassociated from your purpose, your pain, your presence. Carl Jung didn't just study men like you. He saw them, the ones who flinch in silence, the ones who need noise to feel real, the ones who lost themselves so slowly they didn't even notice. You're not lazy, you're spiritually severed. And no one told you that silence is the doorway, not the punishment. This isn't about peace, it's about confrontation. Because when the world goes quiet, the mask you wear starts to fall, and underneath it is the man you abandoned. Most will scroll past this video, they're not ready to hear what it knows. But if you've reached the edge of your performance, if you're done trying to outrun the absence in your own chest, then stay. Because Jung understood something no algorithm ever will. The man who cannot sit alone in silence has already been conquered by everything he refuses to feel. He flinches when the room goes quiet, not because he hears nothing, but because he hears too much. Noise was never the problem. Silence is where everything he's buried claws its way back to the surface, and he knows. If he stays too long in the quiet, something inside him will break, or worse, wake up. Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. He wasn't being poetic, he was diagnosing a condition. Most men today don't avoid meditation because they're bored. They avoid it because they've built entire lives to avoid the truth of their own absence. Stillness doesn't feel like peace, it feels like suffocation. Frankl knew it too. The man who can't be still is not free. He's been severed from meaning, severed so deeply he fears what the silence might reveal. Every distraction is a ritual now, a private religion built to keep the void from speaking. But it whispers anyway. Between scrolls, during sex, inside applause, it always comes back and it always asks, what are you hiding from? This isn't about attention span. This is about soul starvation. The man who cannot sit still isn't weak. He's fractured, and every moment of silence reminds him he no longer knows where the wound ends and he begins. But here's the brutal truth. What he fears in silence is himself. He wasn't raised with peace. He was raised in conditional presence. When it got quiet, it meant something was wrong. Someone left, someone punished, someone shut down. So he learned, silence doesn't mean rest. It means danger. And that belief followed him into manhood like a scar wearing a suit. To him, stillness feels like betrayal, because the ones who claimed to love him vanished without a word. They didn't scream, they didn't slam doors, they disappeared quietly. So now, when silence arrives, he panics, not because he's alone, but because silence sounds like someone choosing not to come back. He fills every space with distraction, podcasts, women, gym noise, tasks, not for stimulation, but to outrun the echo of being unwanted. If there's noise, there's proof of life. If there's movement, there's no time to feel abandoned again, because stillness might confirm he was never worth waiting for. He never learned that silence could be sacred. He only knew it as the void that swallowed him whole. So he's always talking, always doing, always proving, as if performance will keep love from leaving next time. But the ache remains. No one ever waited with him in the dark. He doesn't remember the first time it happened. But he remembers the feeling, sitting in his room, heart racing, wondering why no one came back. The absence wasn't loud, it was silent. And that's what made it unbearable. Now, even in relationships, he mistrusts the quiet. If she's silent, she must be leaving. If she's resting, she must be bored of him. He interprets calm as withdrawal, serenity as disinterest, because he never knew a still love that stayed. Stillness became a code for rejection. It meant you're not worth holding. So he grew into a man who performed to avoid abandonment, loud, reliable, present, obsessively present. But the fear never left, because it was never about the world. It was about her silence. This is why he breaks down when the world pauses, why weekends feel heavier than workdays, Why silence in a text thread feels like exile. He isn't just bored, he's reliving 1,000 tiny abandonments. And no amount of productivity will change the fact he never learned how to be with himself and stay. There's a reason he always needs background noise, not because it entertains, but because it drowns. In silence, something inside starts whispering, something old, something sharp, not a thought, not a memory, a verdict. He doesn't fear quiet, he fears judgment. He carries guilt like a hidden knife, not visible, but always there, tucked beneath the ribs. The kind of guilt that doesn't even have a name, not for what he did, but for who he wasn't when it mattered. And in silence, that guilt speaks fluently. He doesn't sit still because he's lazy. He avoids stillness because his inner voice is a prosecutor. Every pause turns into cross-examination. Every silence becomes a sentencing, and no one else hears it, but it never stops for him. The addiction to noise isn't about stimulation. It's about self-defense. If the music's playing, the podcast's running, the screen's flashing, then maybe the voice will go away. The one that says, "You failed, you betrayed yourself, you're not who you pretend to be." This is why he avoids solitude. Not because he's afraid of loneliness, but because he's afraid of what might speak when no one else is around. He fears that voice will say what he's kept buried. You knew better, and still did it anyway. Guilt doesn't always scream. Sometimes it waits. It waits in the silence behind every distraction. He can't rest, because rest invites memory. He can't reflect, because reflection might reveal what he's been pretending not to know, and that would shatter him. What he needs isn't more content or productivity. What he needs is a confrontation, not with failure, but with the self that watched it happen. Because part of him knew when he stayed too long. Part of him saw the red flags, felt the betrayal, sensed the decay, and stayed anyway. And that's the voice he's afraid will rise. He doesn't fear demons, he fears confession, not to others, to himself. Because once the silence speaks, there's no going back. No more pretending, no more escaping, no more performance. Only one question left to answer. Can I forgive the man I've been? He tells himself he's being productive. Another task, another list, another achievement. But when the work stops, he feels hollow. Because beneath the drive is not ambition, it's avoidance. He's not building a life, he's fleeing from it. Somewhere along the line he was taught that stillness equals failure. That rest is weakness. That being is useless without doing. So he built a schedule instead of a soul. He got good at appearing composed, but inside, he's terrified of what might collapse if he ever slowed down. He thinks he's disciplined, but it's not discipline, it's defense against the terror of not being needed. Because if he's not producing, who is he? A man without a function, a ghost without applause? So he performs, hoping the world won't see how lost he is. He wakes up anxious, not from stress, but from emptiness. Every goal hit feels good for a moment, then the silence comes. The one that asks, was this what you wanted, or just what you were told to want? He doesn't have an answer, so he works harder. He's not lazy, he's exhausted, not from effort, but from meaninglessness. False productivity numbs the question he can't ask out loud. What if I've built an entire life to avoid myself? Because every task is just a delay tactic, a spiritual detour. He'll say he's too busy for therapy, too focused for meditation. But the truth is simpler. He's scared of being alone with his own silence, because silence doesn't applaud, and he doesn't know who he is without an audience. So he surrounds himself with measurable wins, checklists, promotions, stats, all tangible, all admirable, and all hollow, because none of it touches the weight he's been carrying. The fear that his worth ends when the work does. He's not seeking success. He's running from collapse, not of his business, of his identity, because somewhere inside he believes he's only lovable if he's useful, and that belief drives him until one day He runs out of tasks and has to face the man beneath the function. He didn't fall in love with her. He fell in love with the quiet her presence created. For the first time in years, his mind stopped spiraling, not because he healed, but because she distracted the storm. She wasn't his partner. She was his anesthetic. She made the silence bearable, not by deep connection, but by absorbing the weight of his unrest. When she was around, he didn't have to face himself. She became the pause between inner wars. But pauses aren't peace. They're just intermissions. He called it intimacy, but it was dependency in disguise. He wasn't building with her. He was hiding behind her. She held space not for love, but for his avoidance, and she felt it, even if he never said it aloud. He mistook her softness for salvation. But salvation never comes from another person. She couldn't carry his guilt, his shadow, his noise. She just dulled it for a while, and he mistook the dulling for healing. Every time she held him, he exhaled. Not because he felt safe, but because he didn't have to perform. He called her love, but deep down, he knew. He loved the man he got to pretend to be around her. When she left, the silence roared louder than ever, because now there was no shield, no buffer, and he realized he was never resting. He was postponing collapse. She didn't abandon him. She just stopped protecting him from his own mirror. He tried to replace her quickly. Another body, another smile, another safe distraction. But nothing worked the same way, because what he craved wasn't her. It was escape. And now he's forced to admit he was never really with her to begin with. She wasn't the love of his life. She was the space where he hid from it, and once she saw it, she withdrew, not out of cruelty, but because she knew she had become his substitute for self. She left so he could finally sit alone and stay. He was taught that to be a man is to act, to conquer, to move. So he moves constantly, even when there's nowhere to go. Stillness feels like surrender, because silence doesn't affirm his identity, it questions it, and he doesn't know who he is without the noise. He built his manhood like a machine, task by task, result by result. He thinks power is found in volume, presence in performance, but every time he stops to breathe, the structure rattles, because it wasn't masculinity he built, it was an armor made of exhaustion. He confuses tension with strength, always on edge, always alert, as if collapse is just one breath away. He calls it focus, but it's fear, the fear of being seen as soft, unsure, incomplete. And so he performs masculinity instead of embodying it. Modern noise worships the masculine image, but starves the masculine soul. It teaches him that value comes from being unbreakable, but real masculinity isn't loud, it's unshakable. And that kind of strength only comes from silence, from being alone with the parts of him that were never applauded. He doesn't trust solitude, because solitude doesn't validate him. There's no feedback, no metrics, no eyes watching. Just the raw, exposed truth. Without an audience, does he still believe in his own worth? He leads meetings, people, ideas, but cannot lead himself in quiet, because he never practiced presence, only posture. He thinks power is proven in action. But the deepest test of masculinity is this: can you be unseen and remain whole? He looks to other men for validation, to the gym, to the hustle, to the war stories of grind and pain. But these are echoes, not essence. They're cultural signals, not soul signs, and he's starving for something real, something quietly unshakable. Masculinity isn't volume. It's the stillness that doesn't need to defend itself. It's the man who doesn't flinch when no one's clapping. It's the one who can sit in silence and still feel anchored, and until he finds that, the noise owns him. No ritual, no mentor, no sacred threshold. He became a man without ever being shown how to be one. So he invented his own ceremony, through substances, screens, habits, not out of weakness, but out of hunger. A hunger for something that made the inner chaos feel sacred. He wasn't addicted to the thing. He was addicted to the pause it gave him. The scroll, the drink, the high, they all offered the same illusion, a brief truce in the war within, a moment where the noise quieted and he could almost hear himself. He didn't need recovery, he needed initiation, not a program, a passage, a descent into silence, into pain, into the parts of him that were never named. But no one guided him, so he found a substitute that felt like transcendence and sold his soul for it. Carl Jung said it best, all addictions are substitutes for legitimate suffering. This man didn't fear pain, he feared meaningless pain, so he chose something that gave the illusion of control, because silence felt like suffocation, not because it hurt, but because it exposed everything he hadn't healed. Addiction is ritual without soul. It mimics ceremony but leads nowhere, a sacred script with no transformation. Each repetition feels sacred until it doesn't, and still he returns, because ritual, even false, feels safer than absence. He never learned that silence could baptize him, that pain could purify, not punish. So he tried to escape what was meant to remake him, and that escape became his prison. Each hit, each scroll, a desperate attempt to return to himself by leaving. He doesn't need shame, he needs a map, not out of the addiction, but into its meaning, because behind every craving is a confession. I'm not whole, I'm not ready, I'm not enough. But none of that is true. It's just what he was never allowed to unearth in silence. Until he walks into that stillness on purpose, without a substance, without distraction. He'll keep mistaking the drug for the divine. He'll keep calling the substitute medicine. But initiation cannot be faked. And silence will keep haunting him until it becomes holy. Did you enjoy the content and it made a difference for you? Click on Super Thanks and support our work. He was taught to fear the dark inside him, the rage, the lust, the grief, all labeled wrong. So he buried them, not because they were evil, but because they were unwelcome. And over time, he forgot they were ever his. He thinks stillness will release a monster, but silence doesn't unleash evil. It reveals what he wasn't allowed to feel. The crying boy, the ashamed teen, the man who swallowed too much. That's the shadow. Not the destroyer, but the exiled self, and it's tired of pretending it doesn't exist. He calls it procrastination, addiction, anger issues. But these are symptoms, not sins. They're the voice of the shadow saying, "You've forgotten me." And until he turns toward it, he'll keep sabotaging the life he's trying to build. The shadow doesn't want to dominate him. It wants to belong. It wants to be felt without being feared. It holds not just the wounds, but the fire, the soul, the instinct. The same instincts he now calls bad were once his compass. He represses the rage and loses his boundaries. He denies his grief and loses his depth. He hides his hunger and becomes emotionally sterile. The parts he was told to kill didn't die. They just started whispering in secret, and now they sabotage him from the basement of his psyche. Stillness burns, but it burns what was never his to carry. The shame that wasn't his, the expectations that broke him. In the quiet, the shadow rises, not to destroy, but to return him to himself, to say, "I was never the enemy. I was the part you left behind." He avoids the shadow like it's poison. But Jung taught, the gold is in the shadow, his strength, his clarity, his truth. It's all buried beneath the mask he wears to be acceptable, and until he removes it, he'll never feel whole. He's not afraid of the dark. He's afraid the light will reach places he's hidden too long. He's afraid the mirror will reflect someone real and wounded. But that's the man who deserves to rise, not the polished mask, the unedited self. He thinks he's in control because he's busy, because he's functional, polite, helpful, but underneath the structure is a fracture, one that bleeds in silence. The man who avoids stillness hasn't escaped pain. He's just outsourced it to distraction. He fears that slowing down will break him, but the truth is, he's already broken. Not visibly, not dramatically, quietly. A silent collapse that happened the moment he chose numbness over truth. And now, every quiet room feels like a threat. He isn't afraid of emotion, he's afraid of drowning in it. He's felt the edge of that abyss, the guilt, the resentment, the emptiness that creeps in during long drives or 3 a.m. silences. So he fills his life with function. Tasks are easier than tears. Every unspoken word inside him has mass, and the weight is cumulative. It presses down every time he scrolls instead of reflects, every time he says, "I'm fine," while dying inside. And silence is just the space where that pressure gets loud enough to hear. He doesn't realize it, but he's been conquered by the voices he avoids, by the feelings he edits, by the truths he buried so deep they now run the show from beneath the surface. That's not freedom, that's emotional occupation. He scrolls, drinks, jokes, flirts, not because it feels good, but because it blocks the signal. The one that says, "You're exhausted from pretending," and pretending is a war he keeps losing, silently. That's why joy feels foreign and peace feels suspicious. Every man has a breaking point, but this man doesn't break loudly, and he just fades into a version of himself that's always fine, always handling it, but never really present, never really here. Because being here would mean feeling everything. His silence isn't empty, it's full of what he abandoned to appear unbroken. And the longer he runs from it, the more he forgets who he is beneath the armor. Until one day he looks in the mirror and sees no one at all. He stopped waiting a long time ago, not because he stopped needing, but because no one came. He learned that silence meant abandonment, so he stopped listening. But the boy never left. He just went quiet inside him. Now every moment of stillness is a door back to that place, not to relive it, but to reclaim it. The silence he once feared is sacred. It's where the pain started and where the return must begin, not to who he was, but to who he was meant to become. Jung said, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." But awakening is brutal. It means confronting the grief you buried in performance. It means feeling the ache that wasn't yours to carry, but became your identity. It means facing the boy and finally staying with him. Montaigne reminded us, "He who lives in harmony with himself lives in harmony with the universe." Not because the universe changes, but because he does. Stillness becomes peace when the self no longer needs to perform, when the inner world becomes a sanctuary, not a sentence, when the noise no longer owns you. He doesn't need another woman to save him. He doesn't need another goal to validate him. He needs to sit in silence and not abandon himself, not distract, not sedate, not escape. Just listen to the voice that never left. The path was never outside, not in lovers, not in trophies, not in applause. The path was beneath the noise, beneath the guilt, beneath the performance. It's always been waiting, but it only reveals itself when you stop running. Stillness is not death, it's resurrection. It's the moment the war inside quiets, not because you won, but because you stopped fighting yourself. That's what they never told you. Peace isn't found, it's reclaimed. The return doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with one breath, taken on purpose, in silence. It's not the boy who needs saving anymore. It's the man who needs to remember. He doesn't have to leave himself to be loved. So now you know, it was never about distraction. It was about a man avoiding a mirror because he feared what it might reveal. But the silence you fear is also the silence that can set you free. The wound doesn't need more noise. It needs your presence. Ask yourself, what if your addiction to doing is just your fear of being? What if every woman you chased was just a substitute for your own stillness? And what if everything you were running from was simply the part of you waiting to be remembered? You don't need to be louder. You need to be whole. And that begins the moment you can sit in a room, say nothing, and still feel undivided. Stillness isn't the end. It's the beginning of sovereignty. The real man returns not with noise, but with presence. If this spoke to a truth you've been avoiding, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and continue this journey into brutal self-knowledge and emotional freedom. You're not here to be saved. You're here to return. You weren't just afraid of silence. You were afraid of what it might confirm, that the love you fought for was never love at all. In the next video, you'll see why Schopenhauer warned, you weren't loved, you were used.